Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 65. Glad you could join us. Today's episode features a very popular teacher here at Kolbe, Mrs. Melissa Johnson. In this conversation, you can see why so many students recommended that we get Mrs. Johnson on the Kolbecast. They wanted to know more about her, as did we. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Kolbe homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Kolbe online and serve as the Alumni and Public Relations Director.
Hi, Mrs. Johnson. Welcome to the Kolbecast. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, we heard from some of your students. They wanted to hear from you on the podcast. They thought you would make a great podcast guest as both a homeschooling mom and an online instructor for Kolbe Academy. You teach middle and high school English for Kolbe. So I'd love to hear a bit about yourself and your family.
So we live in the Houston area, and it's really hot. I complain about it all the time in my classes. My students will probably tell you, like, yeah, she really doesn't like the weather. But I have 8 children. We homeschool right now, or last year we homeschooled 6 of them, and one goes to preschool, and then we have the baby. I went to Notre Dame, gosh, a long time ago. I won't say how long ago. It was a long time ago. And I was actually a classics major. So I studied the Great Books Conversation by Mortimer Adler. Had kind of compiled it way back in the 70s and, kind of wanted to reinstitute this idea of studying the classics. The acronym for it was PLS, Program of Liberal Studies. And we used to joke that it meant probably law school because pretty much 75% of them went on to law school. But it was a really great program. But when people would ask, or even now when they ask, what did you do in college? What did you study? And of course, everyone studies these very applicable things like chemistry and biology, whatever it is, and pre-med. And I'm like, I learned how to read. That's what I did in college. I spent a lot of money and a lot of time learning how to read. But it was a great education. And it's what kind of got me into thinking about homeschooling the kids in the first place, was that I wanted this classical education for them. So I studied classics. I had the kids pretty quickly after college and started homeschooling, and homeschooled for a really long time. And that was kind of my sole focus, was just on the kids. And then I did a lot of tutoring, individual tutoring, working with students one-on-one on writing. And it's really funny because writing really gets shoved to the side, right? It really gets shoved off to and I straight up will admit that I do not teach my kids grammar. I did not teach, I should correct that. I did not teach my oldest 3 grammar until it became painfully obvious that I really should have taught my oldest 3 grammar. And so now the bottom half, they get a lot of grammar because I'm yeah, well, that book I read, that was grammar's really not that important. They'll figure it out. I'm no, they really don't though. But I outsource my own kids' writing. Because I was talking to somebody, and she's a violinist. And she cannot teach her children violin because she's I can't do it. And I'm the same way. I'm I cannot teach my own children writing. I just can't do it. So they kind of get outsourced for that one. But I tutored a lot of other kids. Usually I had to convince people no, really, they should probably brush up a little bit, or, help them with tailor their essays for colleges and stuff like that. And then I found out about Kolbe, and then that's kind of been what I've been doing since. So more generally speaking about us, we're not that interesting. I feel like people think we're really interesting, but we're really not that interesting. We have this property that faces out onto, it's just a neighborhood, and it faces onto the neighborhood walkway. And people are always stopping us, not even in the neighborhood, at the grocery store. And they're you're that family that lives in that one house with the trampoline. And I'm like,
Oh, boy.
yeah, we're like zoo animals, and we're like the neighborhood exhibit, I guess. I don't know. We're not that interested. We're just pretty typical, do our typical suburban thing, I guess. I don't know.
I relate to that a lot, actually, because we live in a New England village. And I mean, when we moved in, we have 5 kids and they're always outside playing. And we brought a bunch of like farm animals into this little town and they're loud and everybody knows it. So I was in the coffee shop the other day. I don't know that many people. They noticed little things. They're like, "Oh yeah, your garden's looking great." And I'm like, how do you know? How do you know who I am? But the whole town knows us as well in that way.
So you get it. You get it. What kind of animals do you have?
So we have goats, these little pygmy goats, and then a bunch of chickens and some guinea hens, which are crazy loud in town. It's neat though because we live where we can walk to everything, and yet we have like a little farm in the back. So
That's
That's
neat.
pretty cool. So you said pygmy goats. Is that what you said? Is that a thing? Or did I mix two things
yeah,
together?
I might have said pygmy. They're called Nigerian dwarf goats. So they're made to give like as much milk as like a full size goat, but ours don't give any milk, so we just feed them.
That was going to be my question. Like, what are you making with your goat's milk? But
Nothing yet. We'll see.
How big are the goats?
They're like I guess their head is like 2 feet off the ground. I mean they're little. They're
They're
really
little.
small.
so
So
like preschooler size, toddler size.
yeah, preschooler I
Okay.
would say
Right.
preschooler size. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm like, I really want to get a goat. I have a kid who wants to be a rancher. Like when we do school, he's like, I really don't need this because I'm gonna have a ranch. And he's not 5, he's like 9. But like that's his career path. And I'm like, we need to own an animal at some point if he's gonna like for real do this. Which I mean, a dog would be like the natural, go get a dog if you want an animal. But I'm like, I want him to have an animal that is like more of a livestock animal. But I was looking at those dwarf goats because I'm like, maybe we could like slide that in, and the HOA won't notice. You know,
Yeah. They almost are like pets. You can say they're pets. In fact, I mean that's what ours basically are now. And animals for kids. That's why we have them because I grew up with them. I was homeschooled, and we had like just small farm animals like that, and it was so good for me. I missed it. I mean, I moved away when I was 18, and then I was always in cities and couldn't. I'd never had a dog, never had any other animal. Once we started having kids, I was like, I want this for my kids too. And I don't know if they like kind of the honeymoon period has worn off, so now it's just like chores and things for them. But that's the way it was for me until I looked back on it. And looking back on it, I was like, man, that was so fun. I'm glad that my parents did that. So I'm hoping that that will happen with them. But I think that's awesome. Your son already wants to be a rancher, and he's that's an interesting career path for a kid. But I think that's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great, except he needs to learn that even ranchers have to crunch numbers. Like it's not
Yeah.
just lassoing cattle.
Right. And so, how did you come to find Colby, or how did Colby find you?
So that's a good question. Mrs. Doucette in the theology department, she is amazing. And I am like if she was a Twitter page, I am her follower. She's just brilliant. And funny enough, her husband and my husband were childhood friends. So I met her through my husband and her husband's connection, right? So yeah, so we've known each other a really long time. And she was definitely my mom that I was like, so what are you doing? Like how are you doing this? And when she started looking into homeschooling, I'm pretty sure that's what started me on it. I was like, oh, Brittany's doing it. So I should probably be looking into doing it. So that's really kind of what got me started in looking into homeschooling. At that point, she had moved away from where we lived. And I kind of was doing my own thing with homeschooling. So my oldest got to like 5th grade. She told me, hey, I'm teaching this religion class online. I don't know if you're at all interested. It's through this organization, Kolbe. I mean, this must have been, it was 5 years ago. And I was like, oh, that sounds really neat. Like, let me look at their webpage and, check it out. And when I knew she was teaching it, I was honestly one of those moms that was really reticent to like outsource anything because I felt like I know what I want. I know what I'm looking for. I know how to tailor it. Like, so I was very reticent if I saw anything that people would recommend, co-ops and online and whatever. I was just always very reticent. But when I knew she was teaching it, I was like, oh no, this is going to be amazing if she's teaching it because she is amazing. So I put him in it and didn't even think about working for Kolbe. I just thought it was really cool that she had this organization that she was working for, and I loved the courses for my kids. I think when I had, oh gosh, we moved to Houston. We were in Atlanta, and Atlanta is gorgeous. The traffic is abysmal, and I had no time to do anything except survive Atlanta. And so when we moved to Houston, I all of a sudden didn't have to sit in traffic an exorbitant amount of time. And I was like, I have this extra time. We're back in Texas. Maybe I should go do a master's just for fun. And so I started doing this master's program through a local Texas university that was online. It was perfect because it was online. I could do like one course at a time. So like it was one evening, and it kind of gave my brain this kind of extra little outlet that I could do. And then once I did that, after a year of that, I really just enjoyed kind of using my brain in a way that I hadn't used it kind of since school since I had gotten out of college. And I think Mrs. Doucette would probably agree with me on this, that I'm kind of what's a good way to put it? I don't know. I think if I had not gotten married, I'd be one of those people who would still be in school, right? I just really love school. I just love learning new things. When I started this master's, I was like, I should do something with this since like I'm getting this education. Like I should just find something else to do. And I was talking with Brittany, and she mentioned that there were openings in the English department. And so I applied, and I was like, well, I don't know, like, I don't know, because I'm not an English background, right? Like I have that classics degree. And I think I always was a little insecure about that because it's not very easily, we live in a very compartmentalized kind of socioeconomic environment, right? Like everybody has to fit inside a box very neatly. And I was always very insecure about the fact that with the classics major, you don't have a box, right? There's no box that you go in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was always very anxious about that. But obviously Kolbe, I was like, if anyone can look past that, it's Kolbe because it's a class, it's based in classics. I know it's Ignatian and classics, kind of a meld of the two. So that's kind of what led me to Kolbe was just this friendship with Mrs. Doucette, and just kind of, I think ultimately it was kind of just God kind of like, let's just kind of explore these paths. It was funny in the interview. They were like, so I know this is kind of like a trite question, but do you have like a 5-year plan? Like kind of what are you thinking? And I'm like, I think I'm too old for 5-year plans because I realized a long time ago that they never really work. Like I never actually get to that 5th year. That never quite happens for me. But I'm really loving Kolbe. So I hope my 5-year plan is that I'm still here hanging out and doing cool Kolbe things because I really have enjoyed it.
Good deal. That sounds like a good fit for you. Brought together your background with the needs that Kolbe has. And that's one of the things about Kolbe, right? It brings out the talented folks all over the place that otherwise would be limited due to location. That's come up several times.
Yeah, the virtual sphere has changed everything. I think it's really neat because one of the things that I love about when you read about kind of more agrarian societies, that there was this blend of the worlds of like working and family. The worlds were blended, right? And I was really actually kind of hoping that with COVID, there would be this realization that the two can exist together in some sort of balance. And unfortunately, it does not seem like it's necessarily going that way because it does seem like a lot more companies are kind of like, no, you can come back to the 8 to 5. And, let's go back to that. But that's a whole other point. But no, I love these agrarian societies and kind of that weaving of the family life and the work life. And feel like the virtual world is almost kind of getting us to a point that we can start doing that again, right? And having this like mix of using your talents without having to kind of keep your family in the separate box from that work zone. Like I was thinking about Saint Therese of Lisieux. I don't know why I was thinking about this. And like her mom and dad were recently canonized, what, a year or two ago or something. And like I think there's sometimes this like you fall into this idea of like they sat and prayed and like they were just always so holy from like sun up to sundown. But like she had a straight up lace business. Have you seen lace? Like that is not like, let me just whip out this doily for you really quickly, right? Like it's an intricate, like involved job in which you have to be really precise and careful. And so I'd imagine there were plenty of days where she was like sitting there with her lace, trying to watch the kids, making sure that they didn't do all the naughty things they're not supposed to do, right? And so I don't know. When I'm sometimes frustrated with myself because I feel like I'm in class and I'm like, there's a kid out there doing whatever that they probably shouldn't be doing. Am I not, whatever. Am I like am I balancing it correctly? Right. Am I doing the right thing? And I remember like, it's very weird and a very modern concept that we would have to just be and do one or the other. I don't know. But I just love this like idea that we can start that maybe there can stop being the stigma of like you need to and I remember seeing there was recently like within the past 5 years some meteorologist or something had taken her little boy to work because maybe daycare was closed, I forget, but she wrapped him onto her back and she was doing the weather with this kid like tied to her back. And I remember being like, yes, like can we please just start having more of that, right? Like more like just of those two worlds working together.
Well, it's an interesting thing with modern schooling, the idea that kids are separated out during the times of the day when all the business is happening. So we separate the youngest and the oldest from society. It's just all the people in between doing all the serious business. I like the idea though. I take my kids, so I work up at my office at the college at Magdalen, where I also teach. I have an office there that I can get away to, and I've started using it a lot this summer. But I've noticed I also want to bring my kids with me quite a bit, and I'll do it one at a time. Just and they ask questions. What are you doing? And I noticed even my daughters start trying to do what I'm doing. So they sit there and they'll like open a book and where it looks like it's a computer that's open, and then they have another one that they're reading and pretending they're taking notes. And I have to give them a long speech before we get there about you cannot say dad. You just can't do it. If you see me looking down, you can't say dad because I'm reading or I'm thinking of something, and that I can't multitask like your mom can. So they the speech, and then they just sit there and they imitate me for hours quietly. I love that they're seeing that, and they see me interact with other adults and they're quiet listening, and I know that they're learning that whole time.
Yeah, that's funny. My husband, honestly, he that's tough. I'm definitely more of a multitasker. Like if he washes the dishes, it's like 20 minutes of washing the dishes. And if I wash the dishes, I'm like, bam, 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 wash the dishes, wipe somebody's mouth, like take somebody's, whatever, stop a fight that's happening right next to me. Like, right. Like and the dishes are done in like 4 minutes flat. Right. But like, he was honestly so good at being home with the little kids.
It's been interesting, the homeschool life for us since we started it a few years ago. That really has brought together just what we were talking about with the agrarian lifestyle. Like you worked alongside your family members throughout the day. The children had the idea. Knew what life was like. Same thing with homeschooling here, as more applied to sort of how the household is run, I guess, because they're in the house all day. So they see, it's not like dinner magically appears or magic laundry, anything like that. There's no magic. It's like they see it all happen in real time. So to make your life as homeschooling mom and online instructor, make it all work, do you have an organization to it or a structure that you have employed to meet both obligations?
Yeah, it's funny. My family had been asked to do a commercial for Ford. We didn't make the final cut because the day they did the final, like, are we going to take you or not? Everyone was in a horrible mood. And they just asked us questions that had so little knowledge of what big families do. Like their idea of a big family was what they've seen on TLC, right? Which is obviously not real, right? And so they were asking us all these questions and I had nothing. And one of the things they asked were like, well, and it's not their fault. It's definitely on me too. They were like, "What are your organizational structures?" And I was like, "Come what now?" Like, how do you mean? And he was like, like chore charts, and we had a chore chart. We've had several chore charts. There is no chore chart anymore. So I'm not organized, which I'm sure people are going to be like hoping to hear some pearls of wisdom. And I'm so sorry. I have friends, I have friends who their houses are beautiful. And I used to be like, they have 4 kids and right now we have 6, right? That's like different.
Yep.
But then they had like 6 kids and I was like, okay, they have 6 kids, but their older kids are a little bit older than ours. No, it's just straight up that I'm a mess and they are not. So I'm not good at like, I'm going to have like these really organized schedules and systems. What I think of more, and I think I had read this book a million years ago called A Mother's Rule of Life. Have you read that?
Yes, a long time ago.
Yes, it was fascinating for the theory of it. I think I tried the practice of it like for a week and I was like, no, that's not going to work.
That's reassuring because that was me
Yeah.
too.
So Jordan, you're looking confused. So the idea, this woman wrote this book and the idea was that essentially like motherhood is a vocation. And like she had gone and visited these sisters and saw that they had this order to their life, right? That there was this routine to their life where they had, prayer obviously was breaking it up because they do the liturgy. But between each liturgy was like this, there was like, cooking, and then there was like the clean up, and then there was like work, and then there was recreation, and then there was communal life, and then and then prayer obviously is bookmarking each of these different segments. And so she said, well, they're doing this, and yes, I have children, but how can I take this monastic rule and like tailor it for the home, right? And so she started this whole notebook of like ways in which they were going to simplify their life and order their day. I know the simplifying life part, I didn't read too much about that part, but like in terms of like, I think she went through their rooms and decided how each room was going to be functioning, and I wasn't quite that involved. I was more interested in the routine aspect. And that book really helped me for understanding like our day has to have some sort of rhythm and routine to it that is set, right? Like this, there has to be this set schedule. And so I'll get into what that is in just a moment. But I will say this for anybody who needs to hear this. I have public schoolers or Catholic school families who come up to me and say, I could never homeschool. Like when my kids are home from school for the summer, within a week, I'm like counting down the days until either vacation or school starts again. And I'm like, girlfriend, I hear you. Because same, total same. In April, I signed my kids up for the neighborhood swim team. And my daughter was like, I do not want to do swim team. And I was like, too bad. Because you were doing it anyway. Because if you don't do it, nobody has anything to do in the morning. And that is going to drive everybody crazy. So really like summertime, even I was just thinking about this just the other day that My oldest is working, he's working 2 different jobs at different pools. And he's swimming, and my other kids are doing their swimming, and which I know I asked for it, but we have all these different alternating schedules, and it's getting to a point that there's no nap time. Like there's no rest in the middle of the day, which I really, really need. And I'm like, we need to figure something out because otherwise mommy is going to lose it. So it's really hard for me in summer not having a system, because as soon as school starts, we're back in our routine that I established when our kids were itty bitty. Like I started when they were really small, like probably 4 or 5. My oldest was 4 or 5 when we started this. So I'll kind of give you like an idea of what our routine looks like. So obviously we have breakfast. We have what I call a working breakfast. If you think about it, I've never sent kids to school, so maybe I'm speaking way out of turn here. From what I know of my friends who send their kids to school, breakfast is often a 5-minute ordeal. That's a whole lot of gathering supplies and putting clothes on while they're probably shoving stuff in their mouths, right? It's not like let's sit back and have a leisurely like English breakfast that the butler laid out. Like, no, that's not a thing that happens, right? We do a working breakfast. And so what that means is everybody sits down. I make one breakfast, one meal. Everyone gets one meal. I make breakfast. They sit down with whatever it is that they have. And everyone has a stack of flashcards. That's their study for so usually for the older ones, it's Latin. My oldest one, he was doing AP World History this year. So it was his AP World History, like the Barron's box of flashcards. And then everyone has to memorize poetry. My oldest has finally graduated, much to his like great joy and relief. He has graduated from my poetry memorization. So it's like a lot of memory work. It's like poetry, Bible, anything else that like if a class assigns that they need to know, then I incorporate that in. And so I will make them, they'll do it, they'll study on their own. It's quiet breakfast. Everyone has to study whatever it is that they're studying. And then I'll go through with whoever needs me to. I'll make them flash through. And usually with the older ones, I'll check in a couple times a week on whatever subjects it is that they have. Which I really like the form Latins because it really lends itself, and Henley too, lends itself really well to flashcards. There's a lot of flashcards there. And then like the little ones, that's when I do their catechism, because that way, if everything else goes sideways, I know that was done. I'm like, we got up from the breakfast table and it was done. So that works really well for us doing it that way. And then after that, it's really just, we've been doing it so long that I really should have written down exactly how things work. It's really nice once the older ones get to a point that you're like, here's your books and there you go. But the littler ones, it is more difficult to do that with. So a couple things as well that have helped us. One of them is that one of my kids really did not do well with just me. Like school just is not interesting to him. Like it's just not interesting to him. And I realized that it just was not going to work having him solely at home and accountable to me. That just was not, it wasn't going to work. So we're really fortunate that we did have a co-op nearby. I don't know if you call it a co-op. I call it like a one-room schoolhouse. They basically just do one day of his syllabus a week with him, and then they send him home with the rest of his syllabus that he has to do with me. So it makes it really nice to say, hey, your teacher said you have to do this, and look, it's written right there. But as soon as you're done, you get to cross it off, and you're done. And next year, I'm actually using a lot of Kolbe materials specifically for that reason, because I had a friend who emergency homeschooled. I don't know if you've heard that term. A lot of people who have homeschooled have called themselves emergency homeschoolers, and they used all Kolbe, which I felt like was really brave. She has 5 kids, mind you. And I felt like that was super brave that she jumped into like probably one of the most rigorous like homeschool experiences with 5 children and like in very wide ranges of like age, right? But it worked really well for her kids because they were at the public schools, And so she would just clipboard all of their lesson plans onto, like, they would each get a clipboard full of their lesson plans for the week. And they would do their work and they'd check it off and do their work and check it off. And I was like, that's so simple. Like, why had I never even thought about that? Right. And so we're doing that next year. Because I'm doing more with Kolbe now. I'm realizing that my homeschool needs to change. So when I was just homeschooling, it was more relaxed because we did have more time. Now that I'm doing more working, I need to be using my time more efficiently. So it has kind of shifted a little bit with the younger ones from like, yeah, we're going to, just learn how to read and we'll do copy work out of whatever book it is that we're reading. And if you can just narrate the book to me, then we're good to go, which is still wonderful. And like, I definitely still do that. But I need to know that I've done what needs to be done for their education each week. I know a lot of friends who don't need that. And I just really need to know, like, yes, they have done a full amount of work. Otherwise, I end up overworking them because, like, my own insecurity is like, I don't think we did enough. Like, let's read 3 more books,
Right.
So I just really like having that, like, somebody is telling me, like, this is what you need to do, and it is enough.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to, like, how do we make everything work? So I do try to schedule my Kolbe classes around when I know that my kids really need me focused on them. So mornings, we hit the ground running. I have some friends who they will homeschool until dinner time. And I'm like, that sounds horrible. Absolutely
Yeah, I can't do that.
horrible. Like 3 p.m., if you're not done, you're sitting in the corner. Not really. I don't really sit my kids in the corner, but like you're sitting down until dad gets home and then you're doing it with him because I am done. Like DONE, done. 3 o'clock, mom checks out. Like I don't get a paycheck for this, so I'm done. But no, in all seriousness, I try to leave that morning for our homeschool because we are early morning risers, we're early morning homeschoolers, and so we really get all of that kind of done. And I try to schedule my Kolbe classes lunchtime or later, and that's worked really well because when their mouths are full, then they're quiet. So usually I make them lunch and then I jump on to Kolbe because they're eating. Granted, there is a lot of food on my walls in my dining room that was like not there a year ago. But yeah, whatever. Nothing a little paint can't fix. So yeah, so I just try to think of the day in terms of like units of like what do we need to get accomplished in this like segment of time. And so breakfast, and then we have our working period, and then they really get an hour of they get to eat and they get free time while I do Kolbe, and I just have a window nearby to make sure that everybody's doing what they need to do, or like not doing anything too wild and crazy. Yeah, so in terms of meals, like, because that's another thing that is so stressful, I think. And I don't like giving my kids cereal every single morning. So once again, I don't have a meal chart, but we have like rotational meals. So I know like every Monday, Thursday is oatmeal because they hate oatmeal. And I only have to hear them complain about how much they hate oatmeal on Monday and Thursday. And then I get to tell them, guess what? Tomorrow is egg or cereal day. So you only have to suffer through it this one day. And then so like it's a system of like, I know what we're having for breakfast. It did kill me when my husband came home for COVID, because then he started helping with meals. And all of a sudden I had my whole, like, I knew exactly what I had to get at the grocery store. I knew exactly how long it was all going to last. And I would go to get the eggs out and I'm like, where are the eggs? And the kids are like, Dad made egg tacos yesterday and the day before and the day before that for dinner. And I was like, oh, well, that's why we have no eggs right now. But I mean, God bless him for cooking. So, whatever, I'm okay with it. But it did throw me off because I'm like, no, I have like my staples. I don't even think about my staples when I go to the store. They just kind of magically end up in the cart because I know them so well. And then even lunches, I have like different lunches that I know that I keep on a rotational basis. So I don't have to think about it. Because once again, we don't do sandwiches. Like when my kids, if my kids ever go to school, they're going to be like, what is this food that you were feeding us now? But my husband, that was another funny thing when he came home from COVID. He was like, why are our children eating like gourmet food here? And I'm like, I put something in a pot. It's like ground beef and pasta. That is hardly gourmet food. But he was like, shouldn't they just be eating sandwiches? But no, I don't know. I've always just cooked for them because I could. And they don't eat deli meat. I mean, am I the only one who has this problem? They don't eat it. Like until they're older, it's like this toy that they play with in their sandwich. And then they don't eat it. And then they maybe eat the bread. And I'm like, what was the point of this meal? I don't get it. So I just started cooking for them when they were really little, and it wasn't any more effort. Really, it's not. If you like, well, when you get to a certain number of kids, it takes forever to make sandwiches. So like, I feel like meals are the big thing. So I keep meals as simplified as possible in terms of like, we just have a rotational basis of what we're eating. What are the other big things that, I mean, I feel like I feel like we survive from 7 until 3 p.m. It's like we just get it done. And I mean, and that sounds really militant, that does sound really militant, and it's not. I mean, it sounds that way, but living it, it's not. It's just that I know that we have certain things that we need to do, in a certain order in which we need to do it. But there's definitely a lot of like, cuddling and reading out loud and like coloring. I mean, all of that occurs within it. It's just that that's kind of all grouped under the heading of like, this is our homeschooling that we do from 7 a.m. to noon kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Sure, it sounds very down to earth. It demystifies that we're all inclined to think, oh, everyone else is doing all these amazing things. And a phrase I've used for a long time is sometimes we go 1 minute at a time.
Yes.
And I think that's helpful for people who are in that mode, who are like, how do we even make this happen? So this has all been great, hearing about how you have taken this inspiration from A Mother's Rule of Life and made it suit your needs and your family's needs, and how you make it work. And certainly reassuring to hear that it's sometimes 1 minute to the next at your house, like it is at mine. So are there other words of wisdom for families, either parents or students, together or separately, that you want to pass along? You've given us a lot already.
My husband, like, honestly, I really should give my husband a much larger shout out than I did, because I will say that, like, I don't think that this would be possible without his partnership, right? Like, I do think that when I started going back to school and working, some things like shifted, because they had to, right? In terms of like just divvying up responsibilities a little bit more. And he kind of took over the cleaning, which by that, I mean, he is the one who gets the children to clean the house on Saturdays. And I'm like, I'm going to go to the library while you guys do all that. Because it's their least favorite hour of the week. But I have to say that he really, he's been a huge support in all of it. And because, I mean, I think you guys probably realize when when you have multiple roles, you both kind of have to, it's a give and take, right? I remember reading, Danielle Bean had this great, she said, I don't know if I read it or heard it, but she was like, never keep score because you're always going to lose, right? Like this idea that like, oh, well, I did this, and this, and they did that, and that. I really like that idea of like, don't keep score, just do. And then it gets done.
Yeah.
This has been a really fun conversation. I think people are going to like hearing from you a lot. I really like when you were saying you have this one thing that you're like, at least we got that done. At least we got catechism done in the morning. Those little things,
right.
It sounds easy, but it's not easy in real life. I mean, every day I wake up and I fail somewhere, but I'm like, after enough time, I look back and I'm like, well, I guess I did get quite a bit done during this time, but daily it doesn't always feel that way. So I like that idea of like choosing the one thing that you have to get done, or that you really prioritize, and get that done first. Was it Mrs. Finnegan or somebody said, I think it was in one of the episodes where they said, what did they say, swallow a frog in the morning or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yes. I think I'm doing with a frog.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I've enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun.
I can see why your students nominated you to come as a guest on the Kolbecast. We're so glad you did. Hope to have you back soon.
Thank you so much.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.